Welcome to Budget MTG Decks. All the cards you see in our videos are $1 or less, with exception of the commander cards. Also, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and click the bell icon to be notified when a new video comes out. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Budget MTG Decks. I'm David, and today we're going to be looking at another 2019 Commander pre-constructed deck, this case called Merciless Rage. We're going to be looking at all the cards in the deck in depth, and also giving you at the end of the video upgrade suggestions for around $25. This deck that we're going to be looking at today, Merciless Rage, is a black and red deck, also known as Rakdos deck, with at the helm Anje Falkenrath. For one, a black and a red, we get a 1/3 vampire with haste, and we can tap her to discard a card and then draw a card. But if we discard a card that has madness, we get to untap Anje Falkenrath. So that is pretty sweet. So the strategy of this deck is really built around the madness mechanic, which is discarding. When we discard a card, if we discard a card with madness, then we get to have that effect. So instead of just losing the card, we kind of get the effect. And there's going to be three things we want to be doing. We're going to be discarding cards with madness, with our commander. We're going to be filling our graveyard, and then we want to be reanimating powerful creatures. So that's kind of the strategy of the deck. The cost of this deck, that differs right now, so you have to see where you're going to be picking it up. But the upgrade cards, we got around 15 cards that we decided to include as our upgrade suggestions, and they come to just below $25. But also remember that these prices can fluctuate. And if you are going to be getting either the deck or you want to get these upgrade cards, consider using the link in the description below, because that is part of the TCG affiliate program, which we're a part of, which means that anything you buy via that link, we get a small kickback, and that really helps out the channel. So thank you very much for considering that. Now let's have a look at all the cards grouped by strategy. We divided the synergy cards into those that have to do with discarding cards, the graveyard, and other cards. So the other ones are ones we couldn't really place very well. We're going to start off with Key to the City and Zombie Infestation. Key to the City allows us to tap and discard a card, and then up to one target creature can't be blocked this turn. And additionally, when it becomes untapped, we get to pay 2 mana, and if we do, we draw a card. So it's kind of it's kind of like looting, because you first discard a card and then you draw a card, except you don't really get it right away. You gotta wait until your next turn when you untap, and you do also need to pay 2 mana. So for a looting effect, it is kind of steep, and being able to make something unblockable also doesn't seem like it could be worth this one card. But it is a discard outlet next to our commander should we need it. Zombie Infestation, also a discard outlet. For 2 mana, we get an enchantment. We get to discard 2 cards and then put a 2/2 black zombie creature token onto the battlefield. So as well, next to our commander, if we don't have our commander out and we want to be casting our madness spells for their madness cost, then we can use Key to the City and Zombie Infestation. We discard the madness cards, and then we can pay the madness cost. And with Zombie Infestation, if we discard 2 cards, we actually get a zombie as well, which can be kind of nice. Then we have Faith of the Devoted and Bone Misser. Faith of the Devoted is for 3 mana, an enchantment, and it states that whenever you cycle or discard a card, you may pay 1 mana, and if you do, each opponent loses 2 life, and you gain 2 life. So naturally, we're going to be playing a lot of madness spells. We're going to be discarding a lot of cards. Every time we pay an additional mana, we can drain our opponents with 2, and we're going to be gaining 2 life, which is pretty nice. Bone Miser is a new card for 5 mana. We get a 4/4 Zombie Wizard. Already the body is quite nice, and it states that whenever you discard a creature card, we're going to create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. If we discard a land card, we get 2 black mana. And whenever we discard a non-creature, non-land card, we draw a card. So this is actually very nice, very flavorful. This is actually just a very nice card for any deck that likes discarding cards, because this value to be able to get out of this is going to be super good. Then we move on to the cards that have synergy with the graveyard. We've got Sanitarium Skeleton, Squee Goblin Nabob, and Skyfire Phoenix. The Sanitarium Skeleton is just a 1/2 for 1 mana, and later on, if it's in the graveyard, we can pay 3 mana to return it from our graveyard back to our hand, which means that it's going to cost us every time 4 mana to be able to play it again, which is kind of steep for a 1/3. So you might 1/2. So you may think, hey, you know, I can discard this card, and then I can get it back to my hand, and then I can discard it again to get the discard benefits. But it's really quite steep for what you're getting. Squee Goblin Nabob for 3 mana, a 1/3, and it says that at the beginning of your upkeep, you may return this guy from your graveyard to your hand. This is already already much better because it's going to be a 1 mana cheaper to play, but also still nothing really exciting to write home about. Skyfire Phoenix costs 2 and 2 red, so for 4 mana we get a 3/3 Phoenix with flying and haste. This is a new card especially designed for this set, and it states whenever you cast your commander, return Skyfire Phoenix from your graveyard to the battlefield. So it doesn't go back to your hand. You don't have to recast it. You don't have to keep that mana open. It goes right back onto the battlefield. So that's actually a little bit more decent when it comes to a target to discard. Then we have the last of the graveyard cards. That's Flayer of the Hatebound for 6 mana. It's a 4/2 devil. It has Undying, which means that if it dies, it's going to come back with a +1/+1 counter on it, and then afterwards it really dies. And whenever this guy or another creature enters the battlefield from your graveyard, that creature deals damage equal to its power to target creature or player. So this is really nice for, especially for those reanimation decks. If we're going to be casting stuff from our graveyard, reanimating stuff from our graveyard right onto the battlefield, this thing's going to be doing tons and tons of damage. It's beautiful. And then we have the other cards. We got Bloodthirsty Blade, Hate Mirage, and From Under the Floorboards. Bloodthirsty Blade is a 2 mana equipment. It gives the equipped creature +2/+0 and goaded, which means it has to attack if able, and it has to attack somebody other than the person who owns this card. And for 1 mana, we can attach it to a creature that an opponent controls. So basically, we give it to somebody else, or we equip it onto another creature of somebody else, and then they're going to be attacking other people other than us. It's a fun, interesting card, but there's no synergy with the deck strategy of this deck. Hate Mirage costs 4 mana. It's a sorcery. We're going to choose 2 target creatures of our opponents, and then we're going to create a token of those, and they gain haste, and we're going to exile them at the beginning of the next end step. So essentially we get the 2 best things: token, attack with them, or get the enter the battlefield ability, and then they're gone afterwards. Also fun, cool card, no strategy, no synergy with this deck. From Under the Floorboards costs 5 mana, and we're going to put 3 2/2 black zombie creature tokens onto the battlefield tapped and gain 3 life. But this is the important part. It does have a madness cost, and this is how we're going to be playing it most of the time. The madness cost is X and 2 black, so that means we're going to be, if for example with our commander we discard From Under the Floorboards, we can pay its madness cost instead of the 5 mana, and then we're going to be getting X tokens onto the battlefield tapped and gaining X life. So this, we've got tons of mana, then this could actually be pretty nice. And then we have the last of the other cards, Curse of Fool's Wisdom for 6 mana. It's an aura. We're going to enchant somebody, and then whenever that player draws a card, they're going to lose 2 life, and we gain 2 life, and the madness cost is only 4 mana. So that's pretty nice. We're really targeting one person. It's not really for everybody at the table. So if we really hate somebody, we can enchant them with this. Not a super efficient card, but yeah, fun for this deck. Newly designed card. That is it for the synergy cards. Let's have a look at the protection cards. For the protection cards, this deck does not really have much in the area of protection, so we just selected these 3 cards that fit a little bit in this category. You got Gorgon Recluse, Aeon Engine, and Archfiend of Spite. Gorgon Recluse for 5 mana is a 2/4 with essentially what is similar to Death Touch, but of course if we discard it with the madness cost, it's only going to cost 2 mana. Aeon Engine for 5 mana comes in tapped, and we can tap it and exile it to reverse the game's turn order. So this is a card that it can kind of give you your turn earlier by having your activating it in your opponent's turn after you've been, so that you're again after that player. But it is really weird. I find it odd that this is in black border. This seems like a perfect card to have in silver border in the unsets. It doesn't really seem very flavorful for one of these actual commander products, but here it is anyway. Archfiend of Spite for 7 mana is a 6/6 flyer, very nice, chunky, good beater, and it states that whenever a source an opponent controls deals damage to Archfiend of Spite, that source's controller loses that much life unless they sacrifice that many permanents. So essentially, it's a nice little blocker. People attack into it, they're going to lose life, and if they don't, then they're going to start sacrificing permanents, which is going to be brutal. So this is actually really nice deterrent for people attacking you, and it has madness cost of only 5 mana, so it can actually come in pretty early. That is it for the protection cards. Let's have a look at the control spells. We divided the control spells into those that deal with creatures, non-creatures, and the board wipes. We're going to start off with Fury Temper, Alchemist Greeting, and Violent Eruption. These are all spells that deal damage. Fury Temper and Violent Eruption are both instants. Alchemist Greeting is a sorcery. And Fury Temper, Alchemist Greeting, and Violent Eruption all have an alternative madness cost, which means that we can actually deal the damage much cheaper than normally casting it. So these are great cards to target with our discard outlets. Violent Eruption is a new card. It is very heavy in red. It's 3 red and a generic mana. So for 4 mana, it's going to deal 4 damage divided as you choose among any number of targets. That's pretty cool. So we can actually kill 4 1/1s if you wanted to do that, or 1 4/4. It's got great flexibility. Very nice, nice little new card for this set. Up next is Avacyn's Judgment, Bloodhall Priest, and Nightshade Assassin. Avacyn's Judgment, we're not going to be wanting to pay for its regular cost because its madness cost is X and a red. And if we pay that, then we can deal X damage divided as we choose amongst any number of creatures and or players. So that's actually really nice fireball right there. Bloodhall Priest, for the madness cost of 3, it's going to be a 4/4. So that's already pretty nice, very efficient body. And if we happen to not have any cards in hand, it's also going to deal 2 damage to target creature or player. I don't think we're going to be having a moment where we don't have any cards in hand, so that activation is going to be pretty rare, I hope, especially considering our main discard outlet is going to be our commander, which of course allows us to draw a card when we discard a card. Nightshade Assassin is a 2/1 with first strike, and when it comes into play, we can reveal X black cards from our hand. If we do, target creature gets -X/-X, and the madness cost is only 1 and a black. So for 2 mana, it's actually very nice removal. We'll probably be able to kill something small at least with that. Then we have Murderous Compulsion, Big Game Hunter, and Dark Withering. Murderous Compulsion, for 2 mana, we can destroy target tap creature. It's the same cost as its madness cost is the same as its regular cost. You get no extra value from using the madness in this case. Big Game Hunter, very different. Madness cost is a single black only, and when it enters play, destroy target creature with power 4 or greater. That is actually really nice, and it also can't be regenerated. And lastly, Dark Withering, for 6 mana, it's an instant. You're not going to want to cast this regularly because all it does is destroys target non-black creature, but its madness cost is only a single black. So you can already see how wildly different the madness cost and the regular costs are on some of these cards. So you really have to choose which one is more valuable, whether actually using the madness cost is more. And for Big Game Hunter and Dark Withering, it's an absolute no-brainer. Very happy to see Big Game Hunter being reprinted. Beautiful card, and Dark Withering is just kind of crappy because it's just a Doom Blade, but it's instant speed and for 1 black, so it's actually you should still be happy with it. Then we have Plaguecrafter and Malvaliant Whispers. For Plaguecrafter, when it enters the battlefield, each player is going to sacrifice a creature or planeswalker, and if they can't, they're going to discard a card. Very nice. Commander staple. Beautiful. Does exactly what you want it to do. Especially nice against those Voltron players. And Malvaliant Whispers is essentially an active treason effect. For 4 mana, where it's a sorcery, gain control of target creature until the end of turn. We're going to untap that creature, it gets +2/+0, and haste until the end of turn. And the madness cost is exactly the same, so you're getting no actual value from using the madness cost. And it's kind of an expensive cost for just taking over a creature till the end of the turn. And then we have Warstorm Surge and Overseer of the Damned. Here we go. These are the big spells for this deck. Warstorm Surge, absolutely beautiful. And its enchantment: whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. And remember, we're going to be playing creatures, they're going to be dealing damage, and we also have a lot of reanimation and recursion effects in this deck, so we're going to be getting them back and then playing them again, or having them come straight from the graveyard to the battlefield. And this is going to do tons and tons of damage. And even if we don't want to kill creatures, target creatures, we can actually also just target our opponents and then just kill them that way. Very nice. An Overseer of the Damned, for 7 mana, a 5/5 flying demon. I'm so happy this got reprinted. It was getting a little bit on the expensive side, so I'm very happy to see that the Wizards of the Coast decided to include this as a reprint. When it enters the battlefield, you may destroy target creature. Bam, no restrictions. Doesn't have to be a non-demon. Doesn't have to be tapped. Doesn't have to be a non-black. Doesn't matter. Just destroy target creature. Perfect. And we're also going to get a non-token creature. Whenever a non-token creature an opponent controls dies, we're going to create a 2/2 black zombie creature token that enters the battlefield tapped. So not only is that Going to be absolutely beautiful as a piece of removal, but while it's on the battlefield, while we're killing stuff, we're also going to be getting 2/2 zombies. It's an absolutely perfect card. I love it. Then move on to the non-creature spells. We got Mire and Misery, Chaos Warp, and Meteor Golem. Mire and Misery is a new card for this set. For 2 mana, it's a sorcery. Each opponent sacrifices a creature or enchantment. Very odd that Black has ways of dealing with enchantments now. It normally shouldn't be able to. So this is a very peculiar choice, but considering most people will have creatures, at least one, then probably they'll be able to sacrifice the creature, knowing that this player will have difficulty dealing with any enchantments in any other way. However, we also have Chaos Warp. For 3, it's an instant, and it says that the owner of target permanent shuffles it into their library, then reveals the top card of their library. If it's a permanent card, they put it into the battlefield. So this is also a very unusual card. Doesn't really seem to fit in the color theory of what red should be able to do. Just being able to get rid of any permanent is very odd. But yeah, it is a real card, and it's also very nice that it got reprinted, because a lot of red players really needed Chaos Warp to be able to deal with stuff they normally wouldn't be able to, especially mono red players. And then lastly, we have Meteor Golem for 7 mana. It is a 3/3. When it enters the battlefield, destroy target non-land permanent and opponent control. So this gives us also a little bit of flexibility in being able to hit those artifacts and enchantments that normally we would have difficulty with playing as a Rakdos player. Then the board wipes, we only have 2. We have Nightmare Unmaking and Ingaruk's Wake. Nightmare Unmaking costs 5 mana. It is a new spell. It's a sorcery. We're going to choose one of 2 options. Either exile each creature with power greater than the number of cards in your hand. So we want to have a low amount of cards in our hand. Or exile each creature with power less than the number of cards in your hand. So then we want to have a lot of cards in our hand. So usually, considering that we're kind of playing a discard deck, we're going to have very few cards in hand, so we want to exile each creature with power greater than the number of cards in our hand, so we can get rid of as many creatures as possible. And in Garruk's Wake, we've got that costs a whopping 9 mana, so this is very expensive. Destroy all creatures you don't control and all planeswalkers you don't control. Very nice board wipe. I think a little bit steep. Even in Commander, I find it very expensive to cast this. Yes, it is very powerful. It's a one-sided board wipe for just your stuff doesn't get hit. It is beautiful when it goes off, but how often you might just be missing 1 or 2 mana and then you really feel bad. All right, that is it for the control spells. Let's have a look at the card advantage spells. We divided the card advantage spells into Draw, Recursion, so that's bringing cards from the graveyard back to our hand, and Reanimation. Reanimation is when we bring cards straight from the graveyard to the battlefield. Start off with the draw cards. We got Asylum Visitor, Grievin Predator Captain, and Obnixilis Reignited. Asylum Visitor costs 2. It's a 3/1, and it states that at the beginning of each player's upkeep, if that player has no cards in hand, you draw a card, you lose a life. It's just got the Madness cost is the same as regular cost. So the nice thing about this is, should we come to the point where we don't have any cards in hand anymore, this one's going to make sure that we at least pick up that slack a little bit faster and get some more fuel in our hands. Graven Predator Captain costs 5 mana. We get a 5/5 Human Warrior with Menace. So this is already costed really aggressively. This is really nice. It's also a very new card made especially for this set. It also states that it gets +X/+0, where X is the amount of life we lost this turn. And whenever it attacks, you may sacrifice another creature. If you do, you draw cards equal to the creature's power, and you lose life equal to that creature's toughness. So this is actually really nice. It allows us to draw plenty of cards when we sacrifice, for example, some tokens that we've made constantly, and then it also makes sure that we're able to attack with quite a strong threat, which becomes bigger, and also the menace means it's very difficult to deal with. Beautiful card, very nice. Obnixilis Reignited is a 5 mana planeswalker with 5 loyalty. Is +1, is draw a card and lose a life. Yeah, very standard. Great. Every turn we're just plussing it and we're drawing cards. This is exactly what black does, and it's actually great. It also has a -3, destroy target creature. Unconditional removal. Perfect. Love it. Absolutely great. And the -8 is target opponent gets an emblem with whenever a player draws a card, whenever a player draws a card, you lose 2 life. So that's essentially just knocking somebody out of the game. Very sweet card. Then we have Stormclear Occultist, Anje's Ravager, and Magus of the Wheel. So these are kind of drawing in what red likes to do, which is either showing the top card of our library and playing it, or wheeling. So Stormcreek Occultist state, it's a 3/2 with trample, and it states that whenever it deals combat damage to a player, we're going to exile the top card of the library, and then until the end of turn, we may play that card. And also the madness cost, so it can come in for very cheap. So essentially we're going to be attacking. It's got trample, good chance that it's going to deal some damage, and then we just look at the top and then we can play it. But we still need to pay the cost, obviously, of the card. We don't get to play it for free. Anje's Ravager cost is exactly the same. We get a 3/3, a little bit chunkier. However, it does have to attack each combat if able, which I'm not a big fan of. I don't really like it when cards make me do stuff where the wiser choice would be perhaps not to do that. It does state whenever it attacks, we're going to discard our hand and then draw 3 cards. So we're at least going to get one triggered effect out of this. And if we were already quite low, drawing 3 cards is actually very, very beautiful, even if Anje's Ravager doesn't survive. And Magus of the Wheel, nice reprint. It was getting also a little bit expensive. Very nice to see it in here. For 3 mana, a 3/3 human wizard, and for 2 and tapping it and sacrificing it, each player discards their hand and then draws 7 cards. As far as draw in red is concerned, this is pretty much the epitome of what you can get. Discarding your hand is irrelevant for us because we're going to be low on cards very soon, and drawing 7 cards, we're going to get the most value out of that. Then move on to the Recursion spell, so this is getting stuff back from the graveyard back to our hand. Call to the Netherworld is a single black, but madness cost is 0. Very original, very nice. It says return target black creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Well, we are playing also red creatures, so it's not going to be able to hit everything we want, although it does hit some very big black chunky demons, so that's kind of nice. Then we have Grave Scrabbler for 4 mana. It's a 2/2 and enters the battlefield. If its madness cost was paid, you may return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand, and the madness cost is 2. So essentially, we're never going to be paying 4 for this because we want to pay 2. We want to discard it, pay 2, have it come in, and then get a creature card back from our graveyard back to our hand. And then we have Hedonist Trove for 7 mana. This is kind of a different card in the group. When it enters the battlefield, exile all cards from target opponent's graveyard, and we may play lands exiled with Hedonist Trove, and we may play non-land cards exiled with Hedonist Trove. We can only cast 1 spell each turn this way. So what it essentially does is it gives us the ability to play spells and creatures from our opponent's exiled graveyard. So that gives us a kind of like a new hand, which is pretty nice. And then we have Wildfire Devils and Soul of Innistrad. Wildfire Devils is a new card, specially made for this deck. For 4 mana, it's a 4/2 devil. And when it enters the battlefield and at the beginning of your upkeep, so that means when it comes in and every turn after that, we're going to choose a player at random, and then a player exiles an instant or sorcery card from their graveyard. We're going to copy that card, and you may cast the copy without paying its mana cost. So that's a lot of words. Essentially what it says is when it comes in and every single upkeep, random person get to pick what you get to cast for free with respect to instants or sorcery, and they will always pick the worst thing for you. So you may not pick you first of all, you don't get to pick whose graveyard. So it could be somebody who doesn't really play any instants or sorceries, or might have just had their graveyard exiled, for example. You don't get to pick. And secondly, when it comes to picking something from the graveyard, you also don't get to pick. So kind of a dubious card. And Soul of Innistrad for 6 mana, a 6/6 Death Toucher. And for 5 mana, we can return up to 3 target creature cards from our graveyard to our hand. Yeah, that's pretty nice. It's kind of an expensive, steep cost. Usually for 5 mana, you either want to reanimate something directly onto the battlefield or just get something back to your hand, but for a little bit cheaper than 5 mana. But it's also 6/6 Death Toucher, so that's nothing to sniff at. And then we move on to the Reanimation Spells. So these are the cards that get creatures back directly from the graveyard to the battlefield. We'll first start with Doomed Necromancer, The Eldest Reborn, and Beacon of Unrest. Doomed Necromancer for 3 mana, it's a 2/2, and for a black and tapping it and sacrificing it, we can return target creature card from our graveyard back to the battlefield. The downside, of course, is that this is very cheap, but the bad part is that we do need to wait a turn because it's got Summoning Sickness, so when it comes in, we can't use it yet, which makes it kind of vulnerable. The Eldest Reborn costs 5 mana. It's an enchantment saga. When it comes in, each opponent is going to sacrifice a creature or planeswalker, so that's very nice. Next turn, each opponent is going to discard a card, also very nice. And lastly, we're going to put target creature card or planeswalker card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under our control. So this is not limited to our graveyard, it's anybody's graveyard. We're going to get the best creature or planeswalker and put it directly into the battlefield. Beacon of Unrest costs 5 mana. It's a sorcery. We're going to put target artifact or creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control, and then we're going to shuffle this card back into our library. So again, it hits anybody's graveyard, we get to take something, which is very, very nice. Next, we move on to the Reanimation Spells. We're going to begin with Chain or Nightmare Adept. For 4 mana, it's a 3/2 human minion, and it allows us to discard a card, and then we're able to cast a creature card from our graveyard this turn. We still need to pay the mana cost, obviously, but this is actually really nice. The downside is that we can only do this once each turn. And it also states whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under our control, so for example, the creature that we just cast from the graveyard, if you didn't cast it from your hand, it gains haste until the end of turn. So that's really nice. It's going to give haste to whatever we reanimated from our graveyard. Beautiful card. Actually, really, really nice. Fits well with this deck. Also thematic with the discarding of the card, but it's also just a very strong effect in any Rakdos deck. Champion of Stray Souls costs 6 mana. It's a 4/4 skeleton warrior. And for 5 mana, we can tap it and sacrifice X other creatures to return X target creature cards from the graveyard to the battlefield. And for 7 mana, we can put this card from the graveyard back on from the graveyard back on top of our library. So it can kind of you can bring it kind of back every single time when people remove it, but the cost is also quite steep, and you do need to make sure that you've got some superfluous creatures, maybe some 2/2 black zombie tokens that you don't mind sacrificing in order to get some juicy stuff back. And finally, very strong card. Super nice to see this reprinted. Geth, Lord of the Vault, for 6 mana. It's a 5/5 legendary zombie with Intimidate, and it has for X and a black, put target artifact or creature card with converted mana cost X from an opponent's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control tapped. And that player puts the top X cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. So not only does it mill, fine, but the most important thing is we're going to get the best thing from our opponent's graveyard every single turn. Just keep pumping mana into this thing, and remember that you can do this as many times as you want, but that those guys are not going to be good blockers because they do come in tapped. And then finally, we got some mass reanimation in the form of Grimoire of the Dead and Boneyard Parlay. Grimoire of the Dead is a 4 mana artifact, and for 1 and tapping it and discarding a card, we can put a study counter on Grimoire of the Dead. Remember, we can do that right away. So for 5 mana, we can already start it off with a counter. And once we have 3 study counters on it, we can tap it and sacrifice it to put all creature cards from all graveyards onto the battlefield under our control. That is absolutely crazy good, beautiful, especially makes it extra valuable when we're milling our opponents a little bit as well. But even if we're not, just discarding all that stuff into our graveyard, Grimoire of the Dead is going to be an absolute house of a card. Beautiful inclusion in this deck. And Boneyard Parlay, kind of steep cost for 7 mana. It's a sorcerer. We're going to exile up to 5 target creature cards from anybody's graveyard, so everybody's graveyard. And an opponent is going to separate those into 2 piles, and we're going to put all cards from the pile of our choice on the battlefield under our control, and the rest into their owner's graveyard. So we're going to take, it's kind of like a fact or fiction, but now it's with creatures from the graveyard. We're going to take it, and then somebody else is going to be splitting it up, and then we get to go, oh, okay, I'll take the pile with the 3 creatures rather than the 2 creatures. So you're always going to be able to make the choice to get the best stuff for you in that case. That is it for the card advantage spells. Have a look at the ramp. We divided the ramp into the mana dorks, the land fetch cards, and the mana rocks. We're going to start with Crick, Son of Yawgmoth, for 4 and 3 Phyrexian black mana. So Phyrexian black mana can be paid with either black mana or 2 life. It's a 2/2 horror minion with lifelink, and for each black in a cost, you may pay 2 life rather than pay that mana. So essentially what it says is whenever you got a card that has black mana, it kind of makes it into Phyrexian black mana. And whenever you cast a black spell, put a +1/+1 counter on Crick, Son of Yawgmoth. This is not flavorful in this deck, but it is an absolutely spectacularly beautiful card. This could be a very nice commander card, because essentially what you're going to be doing is you're going to be paying it only 4 mana and 6 life. It's going to come in super early, giving you massive discounts on everything that's black. Yes, you're paying life, but you're playing all these black spells because they're coming in super cheap. You're playing lots of them, and this card is going to get really big, and it has lifelink, so to just swing in with it in your turn, gain all that life back, and it's going to be absolutely beautiful. I'm not quite sure how synergistic it is in this deck, but it is an absolutely spectacular card. Then move on to the land fetch cards. We got Armillary Sphere, Scare Tiller, and Solemn Simulacrum. Armillary Sphere, decent card. Comes in for 2. We can sacrifice it for 2 to look for up to 2 basic land cards and then put them into our hand, shuffle our library. I don't really like land fetch spells that just put cards in our hand because actually we want to ramp a little bit, and this doesn't really do that. But for mana fixing, it's okay. Scared Tiller, I am sick and tired of seeing this card in every single one of these decks. What are they doing to us? For 4 mana, a 1/4, and when it becomes tapped, we can put a land from our hand into the battlefield tapped, or we can return a land card from our graveyard to the battlefield. This is perhaps the only deck in which it is slightly okay, considering that we have so many ways of discarding cards that we can actually make sure that we reliably have a land card in our graveyard that we can return to the battlefield. But it's just, I just don't like it. Solemn Simulacrum I do like. For 4 mana, a 2/2 golem, and when it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land card and put it onto the battlefield. Tapped, perfect, exactly. That mana fixes and mana ramps us. And on top of that, if it dies, we draw a card. Very nice. Also reanimation target. We keep getting it back from the graveyard and playing it. It gives us incredible value. And then move on to the mana rocks, and we have Soul Ring, Rakdos Locket, and Hedron Archive. Soul Ring is absolutely beautiful. Yes, every deck has it, but it needs it because it's just, if you're not playing with it, then you're not playing with fire, apparently. None of our budget decks play Soul Ring because it's over $1, but yeah, if you have one, just slap it in any deck and you won't be sorry. Rakdos Locket, it's got the word Rakdos in there, so I understand that they put it in there, but you might as well have a Signet. A Rakdos Signet would be much, much better. So you can sacrifice it and to draw 2 cards. You're still paying 4 mana for that, and you have to pay 3 to put it down. So it's just, it's not great. And Hedron Archive, for 4 mana, taps for 2 colorless. This is okay. This is decent. It's not too bad. And for 2, we can sacrifice it to draw 2 cards. This seems like a much more reasonable card to include. That is it for the ramp. Let's have a look at the lands. Wizards of the Coast divided the lands into 10 swamps, 10 mountains, and 20 non-basic lands. We're going to go through these very fast because they're not that spectacular. We got Rakdos Guildgate, Cinder Barrens. Those 2 just come in tapped, give us one of the 2 colors that we might need. Akum Refuge, Bloodfell Caves, and Rakdos Cranarium also give us the colors that we require. The first 2 cards give us 1 life, and the last card comes in tapped, and we have to bounce a land back to our hand, but it does tap for 2 mana. Then we have Barren Moor, Forgotten Cave, and Ash Barrens. All can be played. They come in tapped, except for Ashen Barrens, which doesn't come in tapped. But we can also cycle them for a single mana, and then we discard them, and then search for a basic land card and put it into our hand. Then we have Rixmadi Dungeon Palace, Sanctum of Eternity, and Gaia Sanitarium. The Rixmadi Dungeon Palace, we can pay 3 mana into it, and then every player discards a card. But we can only do sorcery speed. And the Gaia Sanitarium also allows us to pay 2 mana, tap it, and then everybody's gonna draw a card and discard a card. So this is good for the discard outlets for our madness. And the Sanctum of Eternity, that's a new card, comes in and gives us a colorless mana when we tap it. But for 2 and tapping it, we can return target commander we own from the battlefield to our hand. We can only do it in our turn. So essentially what it is if we want to either protect it because we're gonna do a board wipe, or somebody in our turn is trying to use targeted removal against it, then we can use it to protect our commander by bouncing it back to our hand, then we can replay it again. Then we have Exotic Orchard, Command Tower, and Temple of the False God. Exotic Orchard and Command Tower pretty much give us mana of any color that we want, and Temple of the False God taps for 2 colorless mana, but we do need to have 5 lands or more. Then we have Mortuary Mire, Memorial to Folly, and Downyard Temple. These are all graveyard related. The Mortuary Mire, when it enters the battlefield, we can put target creature card from a graveyard on top of our library. With Memorial to Folly, we do need to pay mana and sacrifice it to return a target creature card directly from the graveyard to our hand. And the Downyard Temple, we can pay mana to return this land from the graveyard directly to the battlefield. So this is actually a pretty decent card, which we can discard if we don't have a madness, and we do want to get that discard effect, because then Downyard Temple, we can return it actually back to the battlefield for 3 mana. And then lastly, we have Myriad Landscape, Evolving Wilds, and Terramorphic Expanse. These can all be sacrificed to search for basic lands to put them onto the battlefield. And Myriad Landscape actually allows us to get 2 basic land types of the same land type and put them onto the battlefield. That is it for the lands. Let's have a look at the upgrades. Now we've arrived at the upgrade section. So these are the cards that we think would improve the deck, and we also have some suggestions of which cards to take out. Start with Neheb Dreadhorde Champion for 4 mana. It's a 5/4 trampler, and when it deals combat damage to a player or planeswalker, we're going to discard any number of cards. It could also be 0. And if we do, we're going to draw that many cards and add that much red mana. We get to keep that mana as phases and turns end. So this is an absolutely beautiful card. Not only does it have a really good body for the mana cost, it's got trample, which means it's almost guaranteed to deal damage. It's got a loot effect and as many loots as we want, pretty much, because we can discard as many cards as we want. And of course, that's great with the madness. We can activate that, and it also kind of mana ramps us. So this card does everything this deck wants to do. We're going to take out one of the swamps, considering that this deck is already pretty heavy on the lands. Cavalier of the Flame is next for 2 and 3 red, so for 5 mana. It is a 6/5 elemental knight. We can give it fire breathing for 2 mana, and also haste included in that. And when it enters the battlefield, we can discard any number of cards, then draw that many cards, so we can loot as much as we want. And when this dies, it's going to deal X damage to each opponent and each planeswalker they control, where X is the number of land cards in our graveyard. So this is actually also exactly what this deck wants to do. A nice chunky loot effect, kind of a wheel if we want that as well. So we can discard and draw as many cards as we want, which gives a nice selection, and as well dealing damage when it dies is going to be absolutely beautiful, considering we can determine how many land cards are going to be in our graveyard with this deck. And we're going to take out one of the mountains to balance out the mana curve on this, the mana distribution on this deck. Then we have Incendiary Command for 5 mana. It's a sorcery. We can choose 2 of the following options, either dealing 4 damage to target player, or dealing 2 damage to each creature, or destroying target non-basic land, or each player discards all cards in their hand and then draws that many cards. It's got that wheel effect. It's in there. Most importantly, we want to make sure that we can deal 2 damage to each creature. That's a nice option, considering that our commander will survive that. And of course, wheeling by discarding all the cards in our hand and then drawing the many cards and getting as many madness activations as we can from that. We're going to take out instead of Wildfire Devils, as we already discussed. It's a very, very random card. The effect is very random, and we can't really build a solid strategy around that. So we're taking that one out. Then we have Hazoret's Monument, Scourge Familiar, and Vandal Blast. Hazoret's Monument costs 3. It states that red creature spells cost 1 less to cast, so that's pretty nice. And it states whenever you cast a creature spell, you may discard a card and then draw a card. So that's a nice little loot rummage effect that we have built in right there as well. And we're going to take out instead of that, so this is a good discounter and also gives us that rummage effect. At Malvaliant Whispers we're taking out. It was also very random. Yes, it has the madness cost. It's not discounted. And additionally, just taking something over for 1 turn is not really exactly what this deck wants to do. Then we have a Scourge Familiar for 5 mana. It's a 3/2 flyer, and we can discard a card and add 1 black to our mana pool. This is insanely powerful. It is a free discard outlet. We can do it as many times as we want, when we want, and we can turns our discarded cards, of course with madness if we have that, we're playing them, also into free black mana. Absolutely perfect card for this deck. Instead of that, we're taking out Key to the City, which was a mediocre discard outlet at best. And Vandal Blast for a single red. We're never going to be casting it for a single red because we can overload it for 5 mana, and then we're going to destroy each artifact we don't control. This is an absolute house commander staple. Beautiful card to include in this deck. Hits all our opponents' mana rocks. They're going to be really, really upset about that. And we're taking out Hate Mirage, which only temporarily takes 2 things, gives us tokens, and then sacrifices them or gets rid of them. So then that's only very temporary. But this Vandal Blast will hurt them into next week. Then we have Life's Finale, Decree of Pain, and Blasphemous Act. We thought that this deck, considering that it has so much reanimation, so much recursion, let us add some more board wipes. Let's wipe the board a few more times so that we knock people back into the Stone Age, and then we can just reanimate that stuff. It doesn't hurt us so bad. So let's just add some more board wipes, we thought. Life's Finale costs 6. We're going to destroy all creatures. Then we're going to search target opponent's library for up to 3 creature cards and put them into their graveyard, and then shuffle their library. Remember, we can take stuff from other people's graveyards too, so this is absolutely beautiful. And we're taking out Bloodthirsty Blade, which was a fun card, making people attack each other, but doesn't really add the strategy to this deck. Decree of Pain costs a whopping 8 mana. It's going to destroy all creatures, the same as Life's Finale, but now they can't be regenerated, and we're going to draw a card for each creature destroyed this way. Needless to say, if our opponents are playing tokens, then we're laughing our butts off because we're drawing a butt ton of cards. We could also cycle this for 5 mana, discarding it and then drawing a card, and then all creatures get -2/-2 to that turn. I say, see if you can save up for the mana, because when we are able to wipe the board and also fill our hand and get ready to reanimate everything, then we're really happy. And we're taking out Aeon Engine, which was it's just an odd card at best. And Blasphemous Act seems like it costs 9 mana, but it really never will, because it is a sorcery that states that we're going to deal 13 damage to each creature, but it costs 1 generic mana less for each creature on the battlefield. So as soon as we got 8 or more creatures, this thing only costs a single red mana. So that is usually how much you're going to be playing it for. And dealing 13 damage pretty much kills everything. And we're taking out Skyfire Phoenix, which as a reanimation spell was kind of weak, because it's also just only based around when we're recasting our commander. If we're not doing that, then it's also not doing anything. The next cards are Ruthless Sniper, Archfiend of Ifnir, and Vilis, Broker of Blood. Ruthless Sniper costs a single black mana, so it's a nice, putting in a nice little early dropper. It's a 1/2, and it says whenever you cycle or discard a card, you can pay 1 mana, and if you do, put a -1/-1 counter on target creature. So this is pretty cool, because we're discarding cards constantly, and if we have the extra mana, we just pay that into this guy, and then we're going to be using it as kind of pseudo removal, killing those small mana dorks, for example, killing utility creatures. And instead of that, we're taking out Sanitarium Skeleton, which also costs 1 black and was kind of expensive to get it back on the battlefield. So I'd rather just draw cards in a different way than having to, or reanimate powerful stuff, rather than just recurring very weak stuff like Sanitarium Skeleton. Then we come to the granddaddy spell that should have been included in here, Archfiend of Ifnir for 5 mana, a 5/4 flyer. It states that whenever you cycle or discard another card, you put a -1/-1 counter on each other creature your opponents control, on each creature your opponents control. So this is exactly what this deck wants to do. It is a beautiful card in here. We're discarding like it's nobody's business, and we're basically board wiping constantly. This card is worth its weight in gold in this deck. We're taking out Squee, Goblin, and Nabob because it is just pathetic compared to this. And as we already said, reanimating just something or being able to recast something again and discarding it that has no value is kind of pointless, so I'd rather just reanimate big stuff. And speaking of big stuff, we have Vilis, Broker of Blood for 8 mana. It is a chunky 8/8 demon with flying, and we can pay 1 black and 2 life to have target creature get -1/-1 till the end of turn, and whenever you lose life, you draw that many cards. Yes, that is the important part of this card, not the fact that it's an 8/8 flyer, although chunky though that may be. Whenever we lose life, we draw that many cards. It means by itself, for a single black, we can draw 2 cards and lose 2 life. And it's also kind of pseudo removal by being able to also just kill off those utility creatures. So this card does so much stuff we want to do. And of course, remember, when people are attacking us, they might think, wait a second, do I really want to be attacking this person? Because if I attack them with my 3/3, they're going to draw 3 cards. And if I attack them with my 12/12, they're going to draw 12 cards. So it's also great insurance. And we're taking out Gorgon Recluse. Yes, it had madness cost for cheap. It has kind of pseudo death touch, but in the end, what would you rather have? Gorgon Recluse or this chunky demon, which is your one-way ticket to Value Town. And then we move on to Shadow of the Grave, Songs of the Damned, and Finale of Eternity. Shadow of the Grave for 2 mana. It's an instant. We're going to return to our hand all cards in our graveyard that were cycled or discarded this turn. So considering that we can, especially later on in the game, with our commander, we can discard and draw a card, and every time we discard a card we pay for the madness cost, and we can untap our commander. We can do it a bunch of times, and then maybe we've got some other discard outlets that we can throw all our cards into, and then at the end of the turn for 2 mana, bam, we can return all those cards that we discarded again back to our hand. That is insane value. And we're taking out Soul of Innistrad, considering that Soul of Innistrad also returns cards, but for very expensive and only creatures. We thought that this one's a little bit too expensive to really get a lot of value out, especially compared to what we can do with Shadow of the Grave. And then we have Songs of the Damned for a single black as an instant, and it gives us 1 black for each creature card in our graveyard. Now, this deck may not be 100% creatures, but considering the way that we get to choose how we draw and discard cards, we could really choose to put as many creatures as possible into our graveyard and get more of them into the graveyard than normally would be there in there if we cast them and they die. So we can get quite a lot of mana from this spell. I think a lot more than the card that we'd like to take out, and that's Scare Tiller. Yes, it could be useful, but Songs of the Damned will definitely be useful. And the next card, Finale of Eternity, for X and 2 blacks, is a sorcery. We're going to destroy up to 3 target creatures with toughness X or less. So essentially we're going to put all the mana into Finale of Eternity. And if X is 10 or more, we're going to return all creature cards from the graveyard to the battlefield. So what are we going to do? We're going to wait till we get 12 mana. With Songs of the Damned, that should be possible. Easily. And otherwise, we just got to wait a little bit, but then we're going to destroy 3 creatures. Any creatures, because they're all going to be toughness 10 or less. We're going to kill 3 creatures and then return all creature cards from our graveyard to the battlefield. That is going to be absolutely beautiful, and way better than the alternative, which is Champion of Stray Souls, which requires not only a lot of mana, but also targets that we can sacrifice in order to get them back. So Champion is out and Finale of Eternity is in. That is it for the budget upgrades. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any comments, suggestions, you like the cards that we included, you got some better inclusions, you got some ideas for cards that people should include, if they have a higher budget, leave it in the comments below, or send us a message on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. Let us know what you think. Thank you very much for watching. I'm David, and this was Budget MTG Decks. Find all the cards discussed in this video in the description below. Also, show you're a fan of the channel by rocking this awesome Budget MTG Decks merchandise. This show was made possible by the support of our loyal patrons. Head on over to patreon.com/budgetmtgdecks and donate as little as $1 per month.